Welcome, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here with you in this wonderful conference that we are enjoying. And for us, it was very exciting to have the opportunity to share this session with all of you in order to discuss some relevant issues for the challenges that our societies are living today. And we really believe that many organizations, groups, and many communities are already using nonviolent actions and the people's power in order to address many of those challenges that I mentioned societies are dealing with. So the idea of this panel is to explore how these civil society initiatives are addressing from a nonviolent perspective these issues like militarism, wars, human rights violations, and also inequality. So there are organizations fighting for environmental issues, for defending democracy and participation in the political space, people struggling against militarism and wars. So we are going to have a small glimpse of those activities that are already ongoing in our world. And we will see how successful they are, how diverse, how creative, how powerful these initiatives are. And these are initiatives who are trying to build positive peace. These are initiatives which are trying to transform conflicts. And the most important thing that it is going to be part of the future. They are offering a window to see what is already working here, what is already being done here. And they are offering solutions and ways to move forward in the future to address those big issues that our world have to face. So we have with us today 4 participants who are going to introduce you these the activities that they are doing with their organization. And we have 2 people who are online. Angelo is going to be the first participant, Angelo Cardona. He belongs to the Ibero-American Alliance for Peace, and he's going to participate from Colombia. So he is making a small effort because now it's like 4 o'clock in the morning in his country. So it's quite early for him. So thank you, Angelo, for being with us. Then we will have Camila Marin. She's working. She is in the world of Peace Brigade International, working in different issues, and she has experience working on the ground with Peace Brigade International. And now she is going to participate from London. So the schedule is a little bit better for her. And then Peter Cousin, the guy who just dropped the suitcase here, just coming. He is a member of the Fellowship of Reconciliation. And finally, we have here also to Claudia Bosch, which is a member of Extinction Rebellion, and she is going to introduce us to this, the actions and activities that they are developing. And myself, here I am Diego Checa. I am a researcher and lecturer in the University of Granada at the Peace and Conflict Institute. And I'm interested in nonviolence since 15 or 20 years ago when I started to learn about this, and I said, wow, this is the way. There is no other way. And yeah, so it's my pleasure to be here with you. And I want to thank you, all of you, for being here, for being interested in these issues. And well, now it's the turn of Angelo, please. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Hi there, for those who are in Barcelona. It is a shame I can't be there with you today. There was some issues with the vaccination program in Colombia, so this was the reason I couldn't attend the conference. But well, I'm glad that still I'm able to be here through this platform. So as Diego has mentioned, I'm a co-founder and co-president of the Ibero-American Alliance for Peace. Can you hear me well, Diego? Or
yes, we can hear you. We can hear you perfectly.
Yeah? Okay,
we are
I'm
just
sorry.
Trying to.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I thought there was an issue. Okay.
Yeah.
That's fine. Then I'll continue. And so as Diego has mentioned, I'm co-founder of the Ibero-American Alliance for Peace. These organizations was basically founded in the first World Congress of the International Peace Bureau in Berlin. That was back in 2016. I gathered with people just like in this Congress, with people from different countries in Latin America and in Europe, and we said, hey, let's go ahead and do something together. And this is how the Ibero-American Alliance for Peace was born. So we have a very strong connection with IPB. I'm also representative of Latin America to the International Peace Bureau. And well, I'm going to be speaking today about a program, which is one of the main programs of the International Peace Bureau, which is called the Global Campaign on Military Spending. So in 2020, the world started to face one of the greatest challenges of our history, the pandemic, killing dozens of people. And unfortunately, there were not enough resources apparently resources to make the vaccine quickly in order to save those lives. And one of the root causes of this is because our priorities were set on covering ourselves through military spending, through investing in the armamentistic industry. And that's pretty much money that was being wasted. So through the Global Campaign on Military Spending, what we wanted to do was to show the world that our priorities are on the wrong side of the coin. We should invest better in healthcare, in education, in achieving the sustainability development goals, instead of investing in developing more sophisticated weapons or buying something that probably we are not going to use. So for us, this is money not well spent, and this is the core mission of the campaign, just to raise awareness about it. And we try also to take this campaign to the streets. Obviously, due to the pandemic, it was quite hard to protest outside. So what we did in Colombia is that in 2020, the first year of the pandemic, we introduced the campaign through a movement which is very intersectional. It has people from parliament, lots of parliamentarians who support the campaign. We've got social leaders, we've got human rights defenders, organizations throughout the country, people from government. So we were able to bring all these people together to try to make that change. So what we basically wanted to do was to reduce the military spending in Colombia and try to reallocate some of that funding towards improving the health system in Colombia, because there are some regions in Colombia where there is no health facilities, or the health facilities are quite poor. So these people was literally dying because they didn't have a place to go when they got the COVID-19. So this was one of the issues that we saw. And obviously, as a result of the urgency of this issue, we were able to gather all these people towards that common mission, making the government to reduce military spending. So myself, with the support of 28 Colombian Congress members, we issued a petition to the President of Colombia, Iván Duque, to reduce some of the military spending. We asked him to reduce 1 billion Colombian pesos and try to reallocate that towards the health sector. in the end, the Ministry of Defense agreed to do 10% of that. 10% of that is not that much really compared to what we were asking, but still it was an advancement, and other countries were seeing that. One of those countries was Chile. Then we were approached by Chilean parliamentarians of Congress, and we tried to run the campaign also in Chile. Chile also demanded the president of Piñera to reduce some of the military spending and reallocate that in order to improve the health system in Chile and tackle better the COVID-19 pandemic. Now, in 2021, Colombia, as most of you may be heard on the news, a protest just break out, a very, very intense protest. One of the reasons was because the Colombian government said that there was not enough money to for the country itself, and wanted to do a tax reform in order to get more money from people from lower income, from low-income families. So this sparked this protest. One of the reasons why the Colombian government was running short of money, of cash, was because they were spending so much money in militarism. They were planning to buy 24 warplanes, which will cost $4.5 billion. So this was an insane spending, and we really wanted to do something about it. So on April, we issue again a request, and myself issue a request with this time 33 members of parliament to the president of Colombia to first reallocate 1 billion Colombian pesos. So we issued the same request than last year, but this time we also asked him to stop the purchasing of those 24 warplanes, which will be unnecessary. Those warplanes, we don't need it at the time. I mean, we are not at war at any other country. So this request was issued like 3 days before the protest started in the country. That was back on May 28, on April 28, when the protest started. So just a couple of days after the protest was scaled up, then the government decided to answer back to our petition and said, okay, yes, we will not spend that money in the 24 warplanes, and we will use that money towards the tax reform. That was pretty much half of what they were trying to do. And our estimates at the International Peace Bureau was that with those $4.5 million that they were seeking to buy those warplanes, they will be saving around 300,000 lives. So they were able to purchase this amount of vaccines and obviously saving thousands of lives in Colombia. So this is basically a good example of a successful campaign in Colombia. As a result of these efforts to reduce military spending, well, I have been threatened. That's something that we were like kind of cautious about, but we knew that could happen, because in a country like Colombia, where there is a huge business, well, not only narco traffic, but also buying weapons legally and illegally, we knew that could happen. But that's something that one has to be aware of if you want to try to make a change, and precisely a systemic change, especially when it comes to reducing this amount of money that has lots of interest behind it. But not everything is bad. As a result of that, I was proposed for the 2022 Nobel Peace Prize by members of parliament in Colombia and also in Chile. So that's kind of the payoff of that. And this is just basically a good example of how people is actually moving and mobilizing to make change happen, not only from decision making, but also from the streets. In this campaign, we have lots of people. This is built up from an international solidarity network. The main offices are actually there in Barcelona. The program is run by the Centre de l'As, which is the main host of the Congress, and our main office in Barcelona, and the campaign operates in 30 countries. So if there is anyone interested in joining the campaign, maybe next year, we normally run the campaign in April, and we try to do the same in other countries, in United States, in Spain, in Germany, in around 30 countries. So it is like very well funded, and it's actually expanding to more countries. So this is basically it. I'm not sure if we are taking questions now, or we will wait until the end. I could take questions now if Diego like.
Let me see. Can you hear me? No. Yeah. We will take the questions at the end. I think it's better to have the full presentation here, and then if you don't think differently, we can do it like that. It's easier for everybody. Thank you, Angelo, for your presentation. I'm sure that we will have some questions for you at the end. Now it's time of for Camila Marin. Please, the floor is yours.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me well? Yep. Okay, great. So hi, everyone. Thank you for the invitation. I'm very happy to be here. So my name is Camila Marin. I'm part of the strategic committee of PBI Mexico, and I previously worked as an international human rights observer in northern Mexico in the states of Chihuahua and Coahuila. So as well as this, my link with PBI spans longer, as my father is an exiled human rights defender from Colombia and is a direct beneficiary of PBI in Colombia, as his lawyer is accompanied by the organization. So it brings me great joy to be able to talk about the role of nonviolent action in context of conflict. So yeah, I mean, Peace Brigades International has been around for 40 years. We work at local, regional, and international levels to protect human rights defenders and to protect communities whose lives and work are threatened by violence. So we have a broad definition of human rights defender. We accompany individuals, we accompany communities, we accompany collectives, and we also accompany processes as well. We currently have projects in Colombia, Guatemala, Honduras, Mexico, to name a few. And our aim is to expand the space within which human rights defenders can work safely and to protect human rights. So a bit about the context in Mexico. So despite not being in an internationally recognized armed conflict, the levels of violence across the country demonstrated by the number of homicides, femicides, torture, forced disappearances, impunity, and lack of access to justice are as high, if not even higher, than some countries that are in armed conflict, such as Colombia. In fact, Colombia and Mexico were named this year as the countries with the highest level of assassinations of environmental leaders. And last year, Mexico was the most dangerous country to be a journalist. So these statistics really point to the human rights crisis that exists in Mexico and was named by the Ibero-American Commission for Human Rights in 2016. So some of the emblematic cases that PBI accompanies are the case of Tita Radilla, who is a human rights defender who works within the theme of forced disappearance, as her father was forcibly disappeared by the military during Mexico's dirty war in the 70s. PBI also accompanies Valentina Rosendo, who is an indigenous woman who was raped and tortured by the military, and the Inter-American Court ruled in her favor and ruled that the Mexican state was guilty of this horrendous crime. And we also accompany the case of Julian Carrillo, who was an indigenous leader from the Rarámuri community in the Sierra Tarahumara in Chihuahua, who was assassinated in 2018. So this is a case that has also been highly visibilized by Amnesty International. And specifically in northern Mexico, where I was working, there's this historic presence of organized crime due to the proximity with the border with the United States. And there's been a number of massacres that took place, such as Allende, which was in the state of Coahuila, which was perpetrated by the Zetas cartel, as well as, number of cartels that exist in that area. So Cartel de Sinaloa, Juarez cartel, etc., etc. The list goes on. There's also the Sierra Tarahumara, which is known in English as the Copper Canyon. So this is where a lot of the cultivation of heroin and marijuana takes place. And realistically, it's a no man's land. There's very little presence of police and military in this area. There's also the huge trend of violence against women and, femicide, which infamously was brought to the world's attention with the situation that was taking place in Ciudad Juarez and the assassination of women there. There's also, forced disappearances and torture that is often perpetrated by military and police. And there's a very high level of militarization in the north of Mexico. So how does PBI work within this difficult context? So PBI has 4 main principles. One, which is nonviolent. So we don't work with actors who use violence to, as part of their way of gaining concessions. We're also a non-partisan organization, so we don't have links to political parties. We are international in character, so we're composed of international staff, and we are a horizontal organization. So we aim to not impose our worldview on the organizations and the people that we work with. And so we do this via our 5 core work streams, which aim to dissuade attacks on human rights defenders and to persuade actors to meet their human rights responsibilities. So the main work stream that PBI is most known for is the protective accompaniment. So this is the physical presence. You can imagine, someone like me wearing a waistcoat, a beige waistcoat with PBI on the logo on the back. So, and someone would be standing next to, say, a human rights defender at a march, at a court hearing, or whichever scenario that the human rights defender requests it. But protective accompaniment is not just the act of being present, it's the measures that are taken beforehand. So we would notify the security and government officials of our movements, where we're going, who we're going with, time, place, etc., so that they are aware of our presence in the area. We also inform the embassies of our movement. So in my case, we would contact the British embassy, but for my colleagues, it could be the Spanish, French embassy, etc. We document our accompaniments via social media, pictures, we write articles, and we are also monitoring staff and our beneficiaries via telephone to ensure their security during these displacements, these accompaniments. So that's protective accompaniment. The second work stream is advocacy. So we advocate for our organizations and for our human rights defenders at 4 levels: municipal, state, federal, and international levels. So we put forward any concerns that we may have about specific cases, but also about general trends that we are seeing. And the point of this is to have a dissuasive effect against any attacks that may be committed against the human rights defenders that we accompany. We also organize tours, international tours of human rights defenders. So for example, at EU Parliament or in Washington, so that the human rights defenders can meet decision makers themselves in person. We also, so the third work stream is communication. So we aim to visibilize the work of these organizations on at an international level. So with articles, pictures, and just highlighting the work that they do. And the fourth work stream is security and protection workshops. So these workshops are done to allow the organizations to reflect upon their level of risk and their strengths and weaknesses in relation to security and protection. So instead of imposing, dictated security protocols that are for everyone, we allow the organizations to think best in terms of their knowledge of the context and their level of risk, to be able to support them with tools to increase their security and be more aware of their level of risk and any weaknesses that they may have, both in structural, say like their building, but also digital security and things like that. So it's quite comprehensive. And the final work stream is analysis. So this is a theme that goes within all of the themes above. So through constant contextual analysis, we ensure that our work streams are dynamic, that we are prioritizing based on needs and prioritizing based on each organization's level of risk. So yeah, analysis is very, very important. And in terms of a concrete example, I would say of my experience with working with PBI on the ground, one accompaniment that will stay with me forever was when I was accompanying the state plan of exhumations in Coahuila. So Coahuila is a state that was devastated as a result of the war against drugs, which was President Calderon's military strategy that began in 2006 and continues to this day. So Coahuila was the Zetas playground at that time. And there's known collusion between government and security forces that was taking place, and it left the remains of thousands of disappeared people scattered across the state, both in unmarked graves in cemeteries, but also in the beautiful nature that exists in Coahuila. So this plan is a state plan that seeks to exhume and identify bodies and involves the various collectives of relatives of disappeared people. These collectives are there to observe the exhumations and are also involved in lobbying for laws at state and federal level to attend to this nationwide crisis. So this is a process that PBI accompanies, specifically through accompanying at the exhumations to ensure the safety of the families who are participating, but also to advocate and highlight any concerns that we have relating to the security of these individuals, but also any concerns that may arise with the exhumations and the identification processes. So this specific accompaniment was carried out in Piedras Negras, which is a border city, literally on the border with the United States. And before the exhumation, we met with me and my colleague met with the representatives of the collective, so families of victims of forced disappearance. And so I remember they said to me, you know, thank you for coming. Thank you for coming. You are the only people that protect us. You are the only people that, you know, are here to observe us. You are saving our lives. And this to some, you know, may sound like a bit of an exaggeration, but I can say that PBI, Peace Brigades International, is the only international organization that is working in this part of Mexico, in this state, on a permanent basis. So the information that we get from the ground is hugely important with the advocacy that we do and visibilizing the context of forced disappearance in Coahuila to the rest of the world. So aside from, you know, introducing ourselves to the families and having the chat outside the cemetery, we also introduced ourselves to the security forces who were in attendance, so police, you know, we had meetings at police stations and with government officials to introduce our work and to ensure that they are aware of why we are here. So my colleague and I spent the day in the blaring heat under a forensic tent, watching whilst they exhumed bodies, some that were in a more advanced state of decomposition than others, and watching as the families note down minute by minute everything that is happening with times and you know, really minute details. So this is to ensure that they have correct records for themselves, and again highlights the lack of trust and the frayed relations that exist between civil society and authorities. Given my understanding of human rights defenders, given my family context, I had little expectation about how this day was going to go. But I was quite surprised about how mundane it actually was. You know, many moments you could look away and just think that you were in a park or something, because there was people drinking coffee, catching up, having a laugh sometimes. You know, it was very, very mundane a lot of during the day. So this just, to me, highlighted how normalized violence is, how normalized death, extrajudicial killings are, and forced disappearance is in this part of the world. So that was, I would say, something that really that still stays with me. And aside from accompanying the exhumation, we also accompanied one of the forensic coordination tables. So this is where, round tables. So this is where the decisions about the plan are made, and representatives of each collective are present here to put forward any concerns that they have. So during this meeting, the main focal point was about the issue of identification, as opposed to exhumations, which were seeming to be running quite smoothly. The issue was with identification. So there's hundreds of bodies that have been exhumed as part of the plan that are still lying in morgues waiting to be identified. New morgues were needing to be built. There isn't enough forensic staff. And there is the huge issue of not having a national database of missing people. So there are many difficulties surrounding the process of identification. But it's important to highlight the coordination that these collectives of disappeared people have had, not only at state level, but at a national level. They've been very successful in that they have had a federal law created called the General Law of Forced Disappearance, which is the summarized name because it's quite a long law. And so as part of this law, the National Search Commission was also created, and this law has implications at state level, but also at federal level. And each state has to have its own commission for search and identification. So although there's still many challenges and morgues are still overflowing with unidentified bodies, the creation of this law is a huge victory that was won by the hard work and dedication of these families and human rights organizations. And PBI has helped lobby for the creation and for the implementation of this law. So that's, I would say, a large victory, but there are also smaller victories on a day-to-day basis. So I remember meeting with the head of the State Forensic Service, which is a government institution in Ciudad Juarez, to discuss concerns surrounding one accompanied organization called Paso del Norte. And they're an organization of lawyers who support victims and survivors of state-endorsed human rights abuses. And in this particular case, they were representing families of forced disappearance. At this moment in time, the conversations between this state institution, so the Forensic Service, and Paso del Norte had come to a halt. And the Forensic Service was ignoring Paso del Norte's requests. And their main request at this moment in time was to do viewings of pieces of items of clothing so that they could see if it could aid in their beneficiaries' search for their loved ones. And so as a result of these meetings that I had with the Forensic State Service, we were able to open up a dialogue, and a roundtable was created following this advocacy, so that the families of, Paso del Norte and their beneficiaries could talk to the Forensic Service to organize the logistics around these viewings, and it eventually led to families being able to inspect and view these items of clothing. So there are victories in the day-to-day as well. So these are just two examples. There's many, many more that still are taking place. And I think that, you know, for PBI working in an area where organized crime is rife, it does bring up many points of concern. So we know that we're able to dissuade attacks from institutional actors whose image would be negatively impacted should an attack against a human rights defender take place. However, the power of dissuasion is not as clear-cut when it comes to organized crime. We know that actors are somewhat rational and make strategic decisions, and we understand that there is a secondary effect of dissuasion due to the links between organized crime and state actors. However, it's very difficult to measure this effect. And despite the continued risks and the incomplete information that we have, we continue to work successfully in these violent contexts where organized crime operate. So in conclusion, I would say the role of international solidarity is key in the work of PBI. International support can help to create, and solidarity can help to create a secure ecosystem so that the space within which human rights defenders work can be expanded. And it dissuades attacks from actors who have political costs. And PBI also, I would say, a main key point is that we accompany processes in a horizontal way. So we don't get involved in organization strategies, we don't impose models, and this allows us to contribute to processes that Mexican people are pushing for. So yeah, that's it from me. Thank you.
Thank you, Camila. Yeah, I think it's important to highlight the significant work that this, because when we imagine the work that you are doing or you were doing in that part of the world, here in Europe or in the global north, we think that this is something like neutral. But the issue in these contested areas is that, yeah, you are just, I mean, the work that these organizations are doing is just tracing the search. They are searching the responsible for those crimes. So yeah, they are trying to avoid always that they can. So your work is very relevant to prevent that violence to happen against the people who are doing the research. And so sometimes it's difficult to imagine for us that this could happen here in the global north. So now it's time for Peter Cousins to come here to make your presentation. Do you have a PowerPoint? Yes, please, here. You have a power speak or
no, I don't.
Can you follow the speech well, or do you have any trouble with the noise in the background? The sound of following is uncomfortable. We can just go to them and ask them to repeat the video. This one. Yes. Let me. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, sir. Morning, everyone, or wherever people are in the world, whatever time of day, morning or evening or afternoon. Quite sure. My name is Peter Cousins. I'm a colleague of Diego's, in fact, from Granada, but I'm also belong to the International Fellowship of Reconciliation, and that's the topic that Diego's asked me to speak about today in the context of this this space. Just before I kind of get into the PowerPoint, just to piggyback on the sort of on what Camila was talking about in Mexico, I in fact came to IFOR, to the International Fellowship of Reconciliation, through a program that we have in Colombia of international accompaniment as well. So the kind of things that Camila was describing about sort of the mixing of severe human rights abuses and the mundane really struck me, Camila. The two things happen at once, but also how people really value your presence there. You might be the only people that have ever given them the time of day and validated their stories. And as much as being present with them, someone in danger or someone who's had a traumatic experience, the physical presence is one thing, very important, obviously, but also the legitimization of their experience, that being with them represents, it was also kind of something that struck me from my experience. So it was really good to hear what you were talking about in Mexico, Camila. But to come on to my presentation, a little bit about the International Fellowship of Reconciliation. It's quite a hard organization to talk about because it's over 100 years old and has different sort of branches around the world. So I won't be able to cover everything about IFOR, but I will try and sort of perhaps just give a flavor of things. IFOR is one of the sort of few 100-year-old peace sort of organizations that are still around today. The International Peace Bureau is another, in fact. It was founded as a result of an encounter that took place in 1914 in Germany. In the run-up to World War I, there was an encounter of essentially Christian pacifists who went by the name of World Alliance for Friendship Through the Churches, who were gathering in Constance, which is a German city on the border with Switzerland. And their aim, they came from around Europe, and I guess sort of from further afield as well, from North America. And their aim was to try and to make some intervention in global politics to stop World War I from breaking out. Well, obviously they failed in that because it broke out while they were there. And they had, all the delegates had to sort of rush home to their countries. And as they were going home, two people who had been at this gathering, but Henry Hodgkin, who was a British Quaker, and Friedrich Siegmund Schulze, who was a German Lutheran pastor, and in fact was chaplain to the Kaiser, to the emperor at the time, had a handshake on Cologne station, and they shook hands when they were then going their separate ways, and they made a promise to each other that despite the war breaking out and their two countries now being at war, they themselves didn't sort of see themselves as enemies, and they promised to kind of maintain that spirit throughout the war and hopefully come together again in the future. And that sort of handshake has kind of gone down in IFOR's history as the start of the IFOR movement, although it, strictly speaking, it wasn't. It took another few months to begin, and actually it was founded formally in Cambridge in the UK in the very last days of 1914. A gathering again of Christians who sort of identified themselves as, or didn't identify with the conduct of the war. They couldn't support it on the basis of their conscience and I guess their religious beliefs. So they came together in Cambridge at the end of the year. They founded themselves formally as the Fellowship of Reconciliation. There were about 130 odd at that initial first gathering in Cambridge. It then began to expand around the world. The next branch to be founded was in the USA. We have Chrissy here, who's a member of the board of Fellowship of Reconciliation in the USA at the moment. And just through contacts and people traveling, small groups were created, small branches were founded. This, in any case, during the war, the First World War was still going on, made it a hard task, and it was very difficult to actually get any kind of real international sort of solidarity going between, other than this sort of the individuals who were able to travel across borders. One of the people from the English branch, or the British branch, was actually a Dutch guy called Kees Burker. He lived in Birmingham and was a bit of a nuisance to the authorities there with his activism for peace at the time. And he got himself deported, in fact, to Holland. The British deported him before the end of the First World War. But there was a sort of a bright silver lining to that, because then when the war ended, it was at his house in Bilthoven in Holland where the first kind of international gathering formally was able to take place. And that was in 1919, where about 50 to 60 people have already constituted Fellowship of Reconciliation groups or other organizations that sort of identified themselves with that, with the spirit or the ethos that they proclaimed, came together in Bilthoven and founded themselves as the IFOR. So that was the moment at which IFOR itself is created. And the first general secretary was Pierre Ceresol from Switzerland, who himself was quite a major figure in Swiss life at the time. So from these early days, and Okay, so I forgot I put a picture in. There at the top on the right is Henry Hodgkin, the British Quaker, and beneath is Friedrich Siegmund Schulze, the two who had this handshake at Cologne. And on the left is a photo of the gathering at Bilthoven, where the International was founded. So that's some of the early photos, one of the earliest photos of the fellowship together. But from those early days, I'm going to jump straight to the current. So the I4 today, how does I4 understand itself today? The International Fellowship of Reconciliation, sort of, and this I'm quoting from the Constitution of our Constitution. It says that we are an international, spiritually based movement of people who, from the basis of a belief in the power of love and truth to create justice and restore community, commit themselves to active nonviolence as a way of life and as a means of personal, social, economic, and political transformation. So you can see the identification with nonviolence there as both a sort of a strategy for creating change, which we talked about yesterday, and the way of life and ethos. Today, there are around 40 countries that have either a branch, a fully fledged branch, or either a group or an affiliate. Basically, that is just sort of a slightly lesser degree of either organization or affiliation, identification with the I4, but essentially they're the same thing. 40 countries on all the continents have an I4 branch, and each branch, group, or affiliate is independent. It can do what it wants in terms of setting its own strategies, programs. And that's one of the reasons why I4 is difficult to talk about, because I wouldn't even necessarily know what's going on in every branch at any one time, let alone throughout history. So, but it's an important point. There's a degree of there's a high degree of independence under this I4 umbrella. But there is a sort of secretariat currently in Utrecht. Over the years, it's moved around. It's always been in Europe. It's currently in Holland. And another thing to point out is that we have ECOSOC consultative status, which is just a way of saying that there are many organizations nowadays that the UN recognizes as being sort of valid partners from civil society, if you like. So any organization with ECOSOC status can, within the system that is provided for, can make representations at the UN. There are many thousands of organizations that now have this status, but I4 was one of the first to get it. And we have representatives at Geneva, New York, Paris, and Vienna. So Geneva and New York are the main UN offices. Paris is UNESCO, so cultural and scientific work. And Vienna is the center where disarmament, nuclear disarmament, is negotiated and addressed. So our office, we also maintain an office in Geneva, which is at the World Council of Churches. You can see from its from I4's past, and even in the Constitution there, the reference to the spiritual element is still something that we identify with. It's not so explicitly Christian these days. I think we would probably call ourselves multi-faith. So either multi-faith or people of conscience. Our office, therefore, is in Geneva, and as well as at the UN there, we've had a relationship over the years with the World Council of Churches, which is one of the ecumenical centers of Christian life, let's say. So Geneva is also an important place for us. And over its history, there have been 6 Nobel laureates within the membership of I4. In the early days, there was Jane Addams and Emily Green Balch, or Balch, I'm not quite sure how we say her surname, but both were from the US. And actually, they won their Nobel Prizes more for their work with the WILF, who are also, I think, here, and one of the other century-old organizations that are still around today. But they were also members of I4, or for USA. Chief Albert Lufuli was a South African who worked for his people and won the prize in 1960. Martin Luther King, interestingly, was a member in the USA. And more recently, Mairead Corrigan Maguire from Northern Ireland, and Adolfo Pérez Esquivel from Argentina. So that's quite an interesting sort of little known thing, in fact, that sort of 6 of our members over the years have won the prize. I4 itself as an entity has never won the Nobel Prize, unlike IPB, who have in their own right. Some of our current, just to give a flavour, some of our current concerns. Conscientious objection. And I call it a current concern, but actually it's been a concern since day one, in fact, since the very early days in Cambridge. So we talk about conscientious objection as the right not to kill. And one of the ways that I4 branches has been kind of made an impact in their countries over the years has been to campaign for the legitimacy of conscientious objection and to promote protection for conscientious objectors in national laws. So the French branch was particularly influential, for example, in securing rights for conscientious objectors in France, who were the background to this is that conscientious objectors over the years have been seen as basically pariahs, persona non grata in context of war, especially. During wartime, I4 branches have been responsible for advocating for better treatment of conscientious objectors who have been imprisoned. So there's a real thread throughout the 100 years of history, or 110 years of history now, of I4 working for conscientious objectors. Today, we're one of 3 entities in Geneva that making the most of our ECOSOC status, try and promote this at the UN, the rights of conscientious objectors. The other 2 are the CUNO, which are a Quaker organization, and the War Resisters International. We have good relationships with both. We have a slightly different focus and methodology to both, but we work very closely. So I4 is the only the only organization, and of the 3, the only one that is focusing on country by country conditions. And we make interventions, particularly around the time of the Human Rights Council and the Universal Periodic Review. So it's highly specialized work. We have a person who's kind of fully engaged with this. And we make the most of our ECOSOC status to do that. It's not to say that the branches don't work in their own way still, but it's kind of an I4 concern as such, a central I4 concern. We also bring conscientious objectors to Geneva and open up a space for them to speak to diplomats. So an example I have from kind of my time in Colombia is when we brought people from ACOC, which is a collective of conscientious objectors in Bogotá. We opened up a space for them to come. So that's one area in which we're working. Another is, I would say, another emerging concern for us, like kind of around the climate crisis. Tell me, Diego, if I'm kind of close to time or whatever.
4 minutes.
Okay. This also is actually, there's a slightly more of a history on this than perhaps people realize. In the 70s, there was a project which I4 operated at the time of the Conference on the Human Environment. But now an initiative has grown from among the branches to try and address this, particularly in the context of the COP gathering that's coming up in Glasgow. So we're going to be we've been hearing each other, listening to each other from scenarios from people around the branches in some internal webinars, and we're going to do a day of action on the 30th, just prior to when the COP in Glasgow starts. And particularly given our sort of concern about militarism and anti-militarism, we're particularly focusing our climate work on the effect of militaries and militarization on climate change, which is a little less considered, but quite a significant factor. So sort of going to one of the questions of this whole, like, how do we create change? How does people power create change? One thing that I4 does, I've kind of identified these 2 directions or 2 levels. there's this horizontal branch-led work, each branch being independent, coming together around common causes, but at the same kind of level. And then there's a vertical axis, if you like, whereby the grassroots perspective feed in to even high-level stuff at the UN through the kind of relationships that we've maintained there. So that's one sort of way I think we can kind of characterize our work. Another historical concern, it would be very hard not to talk about the Gossmeier couple in any sort of presentation about IFOR. These were a French-Austrian couple. Jean Goss was from France, and Hildegard, who is still alive now, in fact, and I managed to meet her a couple of years ago in Vienna. They got married, they met through IFOR, and they got married, and they had their own family. Hildegard's in her 90s, but still as sharp as ever. It was wonderful to meet her. But they have a fascinating history that is very generally not well known. They were traveling secretaries for the IFOR. They began doing work across the Iron Curtain. They also were largely responsible at the Vatican Council in the 60s, an important event in the Roman Catholic Church, to move the church from what was its traditional just war position to a recognition of the legitimacy of a pacifist approach, a Christian pacifist approach. They were largely responsible for that. But they also traveled the world. I mean, even beyond Europe, their fingerprints, in fact, are on a lot of the fall of the dictatorships in Latin America, in the Philippines. A lot of strengthening of non-violent grassroots communities, so that when the conditions were right and these the dictators could be toppled. I mean, this grew out of the local populations, but it's very interesting to see how their fingerprints are on are on this. And it's like, I think there's probably a long essay to be written on that somewhere. But it was important to mention them. So 3 major contributions of IFOR have been in the political realm: the legitimization of conscientious objection; in the realm of the church, legitimizing the pacifist option vis-a-vis the just war; and in society, they've IFOR has implemented this praxis of non-violence. And I think I can jump to the final slide. And we had our first photo in Bilthoven in black and white at the start. This was taken in Catania in 2018, so completing the century. Thank you very much.
Let me just where here. Good. So it's time for our last presenter today, Claudia. Please, the floor is yours. She's going to explain us some of the activities and the way of working of Extinction Rebellion.
Yeah. I think I'm gonna take my microphone well. So, all right, let me just I'm gonna go to the presentation. Sorry, excuse me. Bad earrings from us. So how many of you know Extinction Rebellion? So I can have an idea. Good, fantastic. Okay. Can you give me a hand with the script? Like, so we keep it here, right? And
No,
that's
check.
I think it's here. So you have the menu and presentation. I see. All right. And then let me just share my screen. All right. And present.
Yeah.
Thank you. All right. So I'm really glad that most of you know about Extinction Rebellion. Some people here in Barcelona, well, I would say most people still don't know what this group is about. Why? Well, do you mind? I cannot really manage to. It's like I have no.
Yeah. Wait a moment here. This. Here. Yeah. And, yeah.
Peter, how did you do it?
No,
Is it working?
you can see it here.
Perfect.
Oh,
Is it
yeah,
to
yeah,
me
yeah, no,
for-
no, no, it's fine.
Okay.
Yeah,
It's
we got
fine.
it.
Thank you.
Okay.
All right. So, how people and nonviolent active action are changing the world is quite an uplifting title for this session, which I really love. And I thank you for your time for attending this presentation and having an interest in this. So, Extinction Rebellion, as you already know, is a social movement that uses non-violent actions to bring the climate emergency, to put the climate emergency in the agenda, right? Where this all began. So it all started back in the UK, all right, in the spring of 2018 by a group that belonged to an already existing organization, which was Rising Up, all right? And then these people decided that we needed a campaign just to talk about the climate emergency after the IPCC report was published back in 2019, one of the most scary ones. And so these people organized themselves. And then in October 2018, they occupied like a part of London, and they proclaimed the declaration for rebellion, right? So I can give you an idea. Greta Thunberg, who's the founder of Fridays for Future, she was starting her individual protest that same summer. So both movements kind of like grow at the same time. So then Extinction Rebellion tried to aim to be a mass movement, a mass mobilization movement, right? So that's why it had three very basic demands, very clear basic demands. The first one was to tell the truth, that governments and media would tell the truth about the climate emergency, and the way that they wanted it to be done was to declare climate emergency. The second one was to act now and to reduce greenhouse emissions by zero by 2025. And the third one was, we name it here, go beyond politics, but we just name it citizens' assemblies. I don't know if you are familiar with this concept. Do you know what a citizen assembly is? Some of you know, can you raise your hand if you do? All right. Well, a citizen assembly is a specific type of citizen participation in a democracy in which 100 of people, 150 people are selected randomly, although representing society. So for example, representing as many women and men or at different ages or socioeconomic background and so on, right? And these people receive training by scientists on the climate emergency, and then they are asked a question, which can depend on each assembly, but it should be, how do we reduce emissions by a certain date? Why go beyond politics? Because we think that the governments have failed us, that the governments are mostly controlled by lobbies, and that people from working classes are like voiceless, like we cannot really. The main point is that, so if we want to reduce emissions, we have to do it in a way that it's fair, like with social justice, right? You cannot just close factories or specific sectors without giving certain, without helping the people who are gonna be affected by that, right? So these three demands, and then we have 10 principles, all right? I'm not gonna go through all of them. I just have them here because I want you to see that the non-violence is here as one of these principles, and it's used strategically to spotlight the real perpetrators of the injustice and systemic violence that we live in the world and that many people suffer in the world every day, right? And so the movement declares itself as a non-violent movement, although it says explicitly that it doesn't judge or condemn those environmental groups that might not have the means or resources to be non-violent. Like, we are aware that we can be non-violent here because of our privilege, right? And then this is to give you an idea of where are we now. This is updated in June 2021 this year. So we are now in 84 countries, and there's a bunch of local groups. And as I was already mentioning before, it all started back in London, and then after the declaration of rebellion in October, then after, in November, thousands of people took the streets of London. And this is where Extinction Rebellion called for the creation of other groups in the world. And that's when here we read all of this in the news, and that's when the group in Barcelona was created, the Spanish group was created, and so on. So the main success, I would say, 2019 was the year that the climate crisis was the most on the media. Would you agree with that? Like, compared to before, did we hear so much about the climate emergency before 2019? I don't think so. And this is not just exclusive to Extinction Rebellion. It's the success of the entire movement of Fridays for Future, Extinction Rebellion, Sanders movement in the US, etc. So all these people that have been organizing themselves and taking the streets all over the world, that as a whole has had enough power to make the media and governments talk about it. And so in the spring of 2019, in the second rebellion, thousands of people occupied the streets of London, and then the government declared the climate emergency. It was the first country to declare the climate emergency, and that caused like a domino effect, because then other countries started to do the same thing. And some of you might think, oh well, that declaring the climate emergency is just blah blah blah, it's just words, but it's a starting point. We forced government to talk about it, and that was the big first step. The Spanish government declared the climate emergency here back in January 2020, before the pandemic, as well as the government of Catalonia and the city of Barcelona, and many other governments and local governments. So besides that, I think some other of the successes of the movement have been that, for example, we did have a citizens assembly back in the UK, another one in France, and there's gonna be one in Spain. And we are currently negotiating with the Catalan government to have one in Catalonia. All right. And then, well, you have some pictures here of the actions that we've done. The actions that Extinction Rebellion do, what they use is people's bodies, right? We don't damage objects mostly. That's not so much part of the strategy, but gluing ourselves to the ground, chaining ourselves to places, occupying, doing passive resistance. These are the type of things or methods that we use in our actions. Here, for example, is an action that we did last year for Black Friday. We entered Amazon and we glue ourselves to the glass of one of the main stores, of the headquarters, sorry. This is for Endesa. Well, I just gathered some pictures so you can get a glimpse of the things that we've been doing. And so, as you can see, well, there's this quote that we use a lot that is from Margaret Mead. You might already know it, but never doubt that the small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it is the only thing that ever has. This is sort of like a mantra for us. We use this to encourage ourselves before actions and after actions. And it's true. I mean, we've got the evidence here. Globally, we achieved having the different governments to talk about the climate crisis. And locally here, we have a new climate crisis law. We've got the Catalan government negotiating with us after we occupied one of their headquarters back in June to have a citizens assembly. And this is it. So now I'd like to ask for your questions, because I'd rather answer what are your doubts, or what would you like to know more about Extinction Rebellion, and then I can answer to you. Is that all right?
Yeah.
All right.
Thank you, Gloria.
Thank you.
Yes. Here, it's not so easy. It looks easy, but two computers at the same time with a projector, cameras here. So a little a mess. But let me summarize briefly before I give you the floor to you for your questions. We have been watching here stories about how this nonviolent action is changing the world. And it has been changing the world not now, not with the new organizations which are already also contributing to change the world in a nonviolent way, but also with very old organizations working already through nonviolent ways to change the world. So we have new organizations trying to change the world in this way, which is not really new, because many other organizations have been already doing it quite successfully too. We are seeing that there are different approaches to this kind of work. We have a principal organization who follow their beliefs or the spiritual conscious, but others that use this nonviolence as a strategic way of struggle. we have along the range of wide range of organizations working on nonviolent ways, very different approaches to nonviolence. What all of them share is this focus on grassroots activities. So they are very grounded to the people, the communities, and very diverse according to the communities where are located and what are their own experiences. And of course, you saw that they are dealing with these big issues. I mentioned at the beginning, war, militarization, climate crisis, and they are getting success, protecting people, defunding the military, contributing to convince government to defund the military, fostering the refusal not to kill all across the decades, or raising awareness over climate crisis and mobilizing youth against this. So we have a very vibrant community of organizations and communities struggling using nonviolent and civil resistance strategies and tactics. So now you have the opportunity to ask them more things and to know more about this. So if you have any question, please, the floor is yours. Don't be shy. Please. Puedes hacerlo. Vente aquí, que te escuchen aquí también. I will translate later. Or I will try.
¿Aquí?
Sí.
Ah, bueno. Me pareció súper interesante e importante lo que decía Claudia sobre bueno, esta nueva organización y todo lo que se puede meter adelante con el tema climático. También el enfoque con justicia climática y justicia social. Y quisiera saber cómo ustedes organizan también los links con los sindicatos en los países. Por ejemplo, nosotros en Bélgica tenemos mucha lucha contra, o sea, para tener pensiones contra la austeridad. Y me pregunto cómo hacer también para que el tema del clima entre en el sindicato, pero también que los temas sindicales entren en Extinction Rebellion. Paula.
So Paula was asking about, was recognizing how interesting is the way that Extinction Rebellion is combining environmental and social justice. And she was asking her about the connection of Extinction Rebellion with the trade union.
All right, so one of the things, Extinction doesn't advocate for specific policies, right? Our aim is to have a climate citizens assemblies, and from there have the public policies that that group of people decides, right? And that should be binding. Nonetheless, we do speak to many actors like other movements and also unions. I can speak for the experience here in Barcelona. Since the beginning of the creation of Extinction Rebellion, we promoted the creation of a network of actors that is called La Xarxa, the Moviments per la Justícia Climàtica, aquí. And whenever we've organized big demonstrations, such as the demonstration on the 27th of September that was led by Fridays for Future, the unions have been involved in the talks. But for the specific case of Extinction Rebellion, as we don't advocate for specific policies, that's not our aim. We are in conversations with unions. Have I made my point clear? Kind of like we speak with them, but we don't ask them for specific things. We just want them to be more aware about the climate crisis and to join our movement more than that. Because Extinction Rebellion in the end is a very broad movement. Its objective is to mobilize as many people as possible. So it doesn't go in this type of questions. It's one of the trade-offs kind of things. Extinction Rebellion has its goods and bads, its pros and cons, and one of them is this. Sometimes it's too generalistic. I would say. But this is what we do so more people can join the movement. For example, we don't publicly identify ourselves with like the right or the left, even though our speech identifies more with the left, but we try not to use certain language so we can attract people from different backgrounds, different political, from the different points of the political spectrum. So you can get an idea of the strategy that we use.
I wanted to ask you a question.
Yeah.
I have some participants from home, so you have to
Okay, yeah. My question was kind of picking up on what you were just saying, and like, do you notice, like, what, perhaps in your experience, what's the reaction of the authorities been? Have they generally been welcoming to the, or less so, or do you notice a difference between sort of perhaps right-wing or right-wing, or sort of right-leaning authorities or left-leaning authorities? Like, what's your, how's that all played out?
Good question. So, as you know, in Spain, we have kind of like a left government now, as well as in the city hall of Barcelona. And both have been kind of more open to talk with us in both cases. Whilst before the elections in Catalonia, we have more like a center-right government in Catalonia, and it was more difficult. They were not so keen on the idea of the citizens' assembly, for example, or opening up spaces for real citizen participation. In the case of the government in Catalonia, they declared by themselves, like, oh, we did this, and then they went on Twitter and checked Greta Thunberg, oh, we did this and we did that, but it was mostly greenwashing. So yeah, there's a difference. We feel a big difference. That answers your question.
Yeah, I was just thinking, I mean, it's very interesting. It's not only a question to you, but I mean, since we are here from different organizations and different, maybe it would be very interesting if we can do, we are talking about nonviolent action. So maybe kind of a list or brainstorm of what kind of action, nonviolent action can we make? Because you guys, some ideas and some examples of what we've done. It's very interesting. And I don't know, maybe we can also share other ideas or.
Here, what's your name?
Marta.
Marta was asking about methods. Well, we are here, different organizations. We are talking about nonviolence, but what could we do? Where can we find a list, or how can we produce a list of actions or methods to work? Let me show you something, if I found it, because this list already exists. I mean, it's a very old list already. It started by Gene Sharp, which is one of the historical researchers on nonviolence, and he elaborated one of these lists like already almost 50 years ago, 73, something like that, and it's available online, so you have a list there. Now it's been updated also by the people in the ACNC, the International Center for Nonviolent Conflict. They updated and they made a report adding all the tactics that they have been employed by different movements and organizations, and someone tried to collect them. So yeah, here. Yeah, so for instance, here you have easy search on Google, you can find this, and this is, for instance, one institution working on nonviolent action and trying to promote tools and disseminate trainings and information about that. So you have here one of these lists, but you can also find this in the books of Jim Sharp, the books from 1973, sorry, called, do you remember the name of the book? Power of Nonviolent Power, Nonviolent Power. Yeah. So yeah, and another useful resource, as I told you, with a lot of information and
So this is updated set, right?
this is the original 90. Oh, let me. Oops. I'm using this here. Stop. That was the original list. Then wait, place here and see.
Politics of nonviolent action.
Yeah, politics. National. Where, here, this is the website of the ICNC. You can see there. And the interesting thing here is that they have this resource library with many resources in English, but also they translated many books and articles into other languages. And you can also have movies, documentaries showing some different examples of organizations or movements. And then in many cases, if you come also from the Global South, they can send you the videos or the documents for free. And usually, if you don't want printed copies, these are available already from here. So it's a good point to, it's a good way to start reading about this and to have ideas of what the other parts of the world they have been trying. And also they offer like training activities for activists. So they are open to receive activists. And now with this hybrid ways of communication and training, it's also very easy for many people in the Global South to participate in their training. So take a look on that because it's very, very interesting. Do you have any questions? Yes, there.
Hi, I'm with the Fellowship of Reconciliation USA, which is part of IFOR. And on October 30th, we are having IFOR is having a global day of action about militarism as a driver of climate change. And I'm wondering if Extinction Rebellion has any specific asks or demands, like a short list. For example, after COP21, that was like a day late and $1 short, and now we are, decades late and trillions short. So what are the specific short list asks?
Someone here in the, what's your name? Susan was mentioned the relation between militarization and the connection with the environmental situation, degradation, and the emergency, the climate crisis, the climate emergency. You wanted to say something?
Well,
No.
I think the question was addressed.
Yeah, there is a clear relation between that. And yesterday we could see this in the plenary session. this short video from the activists from WAM, showing the relation between not only between militarism and colonization, but also all the degradation created by the military impact of the American base there. Quite interesting. Linking environmental emergency, linking nuclear weapons testing in the Bikini Islands next to that, linking issues of colonization and the lack of self-control or decision over the policies to implement in the island. And it was quite interesting, and it's very related to what you're saying. Here, Lydia was saying in the chat that don't forget something about this list of methods of Gene Sharp or others. These are just a list of different tactics and strategies, but we cannot take them and apply them, all of them, to a particular context. Every context, every fight, every struggle has different features, and people also involved in the struggle have different characteristics or have different skills. So you have to match and strategize what you are going to do according to the resources you have. Of course, you have a guide there with this list of activities, but don't forget that you need to adapt it to the particular context. I think, Lydia, that was what you were trying to stress here. You have any comment, question? I have one. I have several of them. One I picked it in the street this morning. I mean, at the beginning of the plenary session. Someone from Syria asked me. I mean, she's an activist who had been working against the war and trying to promote change the regime in Syria in the last year through nonviolent means. And she said, well, after all we have done, nobody knows outside of Syria what we have been doing in non-violent ways to try to change this. So her question was, how can we make more visible or non-violent efforts for conflict transformation and peace building outside their communities, outside the particular context? Because most of what we receive through mass media from information from Syria is about the war, the fighting, and the armed resistance to the Assad or whatever, or ISIS. But how can we, she was asking, how can we get for the stories or nonviolent stories visible and known in the world? What do you think? For example.
I guess others might have answers to this question as well. So, but it puts me in mind yesterday of what we were discussing about in the panel with the Placenza people, with the media folk, and what if this is a question of kind of making yourself visible to the world, then you're kind of got, and I mean, you can make use of social media to whatever extent you can, I guess, but then like maybe the traditional media can be a tool as well, but then it's sort of on their terms, and well, for that you kind of need to make news about something, right? Like it's the violence that makes the news. It's so something out of the ordinary might catch the attention. Something either disruptive in the way that certainly in the UK, Extinction is Rebellion has been quite successful, I think, in raising its profile because it's chosen a disruptive approach, or something that would some action which cuts through, I guess. So I don't know in the case of Syria how they've gone about it, and it must be very hard in the circumstances to actually. But I'd have thought there's a market for that kind of for other stories or for other approaches to be able to cut through. But I would have thought it's a question of kind of strategically thinking about how to visibilize and think a little bit in terms of what traditional media maybe are looking for.
Camila, how is PBI visibilizing not only its work, but also the work of the organization that you are accompanying?
So we write articles, we make videos, and we have these international tours of human rights defenders, which we attempt to visibilize as much as possible. I think these tours are really important as well, because I guess seeing pictures and videos can give you an idea of the context. But I think when people, say in Europe or in Northern America, are able to meet the human rights defenders and truly understand what it is that they do, and potentially create, a more personal relationship, that also helps a lot. But I think generally comms is something that a lot of organizations struggle with, I feel, unless they have a lot of funds. Comms usually can be quite, left to the back of the priority, especially for smaller organizations. But locally in Chihuahua, we, when I was there, we were making efforts to create links with local newspapers that were, say, not non-mainstream, so smaller newspapers, and making these relations with journalists, so that we could also, and that would also advance our context analysis and everything. So yeah.
This is very interesting, because what PBI does is to integrate the communication part into the strategies of the organization in order to reinforce the protection that they are able to provide. So they combine the physical presence, but also all the communications and awareness in order to mobilize political support for their work. So it's something very interesting, because the protection that offers PBI is not only due to the having witnesses accompanying the people who are threatened. It's also because they create a kind of umbrella through to those political advocacy and communication with raising awareness, that there are many people watching or aware of what they are doing on the ground. So this is very interesting, and it has been copied by other organizations too. And there's a question for Angelo. Angelo, who are the most important political allies in Colombia and at the international level in the goal to reduce the budget to the armed forces? Mark is asking for the alliance, the Ibero-American Alliance for Peace. Please, Angelo.
Yeah, well, the campaign is being supported by surprisingly different political parties. It's not just one particular political party, and that's the incredible thing about the campaign, the ability to be able to bring those that normally have differences, because there are even parties that fight against others. So being able to congregate all those parties to support the common cause is something amazing. In terms of the international level, we are supported by the United Nations Office for Disarmament Affairs, and we work hand by hand with the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute, SIPRI. They annually launch their report on military spending. That very same day is when we launch press conferences, when we make the request for reducing military spending. So these are our two main allies at international level. And then obviously comes all that political work that we do with politicians in the countries where we operate. And obviously also civil society organizations. The campaign has got more than 100 organizations across the world. So it is very well supported.
Lydia was asking also, well, she was agree with what you said before about what makes the news, and that nonviolent doesn't make the news, but she pointed out that the importance of funding, to have resources to fund these campaigns. And after that, she linked it with the campaign of Angelo was mentioning before. She was asking him, well, you said that at the end of your presentation that your campaign, in order to avoid or to reduce the military funding by the government, it was well funded. I mean, you have resources to create this campaign. And she was asking, how do you publicity? How do you do publicity to get so much funding?
Sorry, I was just speaking on mute, just realized. Yeah, no, I'm sorry. I didn't mean that it was funded like in terms of economic funding, but in terms of solidarity with different organizations, politicians, the people that came to support the campaign, very influential people. And so pretty much I was talking in terms of a strategy. In the strategy, we have famous people, so public figures in Colombia who are able to make echo. So if these people is talking about something, then the news come up to talk about it. I think in order to be able to implement this successfully, this must be part of the national conversation. So in order to bring that to the national level, we have to be able to call the attention of media. So that's why we take the opportunity to make these press conferences the very same day in which CIPRI releases the data about military spending, because in that occasion we have something to say to the media. And so this is pretty much how we work the publicity. It's been made essentially by those famous people or public figures who have a loud voice. And if they care about something, then media will care about it also. So that's pretty much the strategy that we use here.
Thank you, Angelo. Please.
Question. I think violence and peace really has to do with the distribution of power. You know? So we have been listening about a lot of organizations that go to the people and try to work with the people, but I don't know. I don't know what place have colonization or the reflection of maybe some colonization attitudes and internal politics that you have in the people. I mean, I've been working with really poor people in Latin America, and it's often that when an organization goes to work with them, you know, some of them doesn't have a reflection on the effects that have, like teaching things to the people, but not making people take their own decisions. You know, so what's the role that this reflection has to have in your work?
Let me try to. Okay. What's your name?
Leonardo.
Leonardo was mentioned that this sense about nonviolence and nonviolent action has to be very much with the redistribution of power, no? How to change conflicts and how do you reorganize the power relations between communities, groups, or whatever. So he was especially interested to know if these organizations presenting here today, they have any or how do they deal with the opportunities for neocolonialism or to ways to impose the ideas or the will or the goodwill of the global north over the global south organizations or communities. So he was asking if there is any reflection in your organization and how do you relate with this. So Camila, I think maybe you could say something here.
Sure. So horizontality is something that PBI takes quite seriously. So we, on an internal level, we make all our decisions based on consensus. And when we are, interacting with organizations that we work with alongside, we always begin with the knowledge that, we're not experts, that they're the experts, because obviously they're the ones that are working in that context day in, day out. And as observers, we're there for a year, we're there for a short period of time, within which, you can acquire some level of information, but obviously it's nowhere near in comparison to the knowledge that these human rights defenders have. So in our interactions, in our trainings that we deliver, the methodology is such that we're providing tools and we're not imposing any specific plan of action, but we support them in making sure that they are keeping security at the forefront through these tools, and so they know that we're someone that they can come to should they need support in this area. But yeah, what else? For example, we don't kind of direct strategies or anything like that. So we're very much an organization that people come to for security and protection. So yeah.
Thank you, Camila. Peter, you want to add something here?
Yeah.
Come here.
So with this question, you've touched upon two of the 10 principles of Extinction Rebellion. One is that we challenge the structures of power internally. So that means that in a group, whenever there's going to be someone that comes from a minority, is always going to be given space and priority to talk, right? This is internal. And the way that we structure the movement is completely horizontal. And the other principle is that we are based on we are a decentralized movement. So each branch that emerges, it's because the people of that territory decides to do so. We never go somewhere and say, you have to start an exact group here. No, it always happens because the people from those places decide to. And the other thing that I wanted to mention is that we've had to reflect a lot on that. I mean, this was already in the principles, but after, during these years, one of the main criticisms that Extinction Rebellion has received is that it is a movement mostly formed by graduate white people, right? People with university degrees and so on. And so it's completely true. And what we've tried to do is to incorporate as much as we can in our speech, the recognition that the way in which we demonstrate and we act and we defend, it's based on our privilege, that we acknowledge that there's a lot of climate activists and environmental activists dying every year in other countries. And that's why we take the streets, because we can get arrested and no one's going to shoot us at us. And we want to visualize that this is not the truth for most people in the global south. So if that answers your question.
I'm sorry very much, but we received already the second warning by the organizer. We need to finish this wonderful meeting. I hope we will meet in future conferences, sessions, or activities wherever they happen. So thank you very much for being here, there online, and enjoy the rest of the conference. All right.